Imagine this. Just one day ago, on March 8th, 2026, Iran shocked the world. In the midst of chaos, under the shadow of falling bombs, the regime named Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the assassinated supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as the country's new top authority. With relentless US and Israeli airstrikes pounding Iranian soil, and the smoke still rising from critical infrastructure, this dynastic handoff raises a chilling, urgent question. Does this unprecedented move signal an era of endless, unrestrained war? Or is it a desperate, fragile bid for regime survival? This is the story of Iran's lightning-fast leadership change amid absolute wartime chaos, and what it could mean for global tensions that are already boiling over. Let's start with the immediate context, the spark that ignited this current firestorm. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the man who ruled Iran with an iron grip for over 3 decades, was killed on February 28, 2026. His death came in the brutal opening salvos of what international security analysts are already calling the 2026 Iran War. Coordinated, highly advanced US and Israeli strikes bypassed sophisticated air defenses, targeting key military and leadership sites, and sparking an immediate, terrifying leadership vacuum in the heart of Tehran. But why does this succession matter so much right now? Why is the entire world holding its breath? Because the supreme leader of Iran isn't just a ceremonial figurehead or a spiritual guide. He is the absolute core of the Iranian state. He commands the entirety of Iran's armed forces, dictates its aggressive foreign policy, and holds the ultimate keys to its controversial nuclear ambitions. Through powerful unelected bodies like the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and the Guardian Council, the supreme leader's word is final. So, in the middle of active, devastating combat, with critical oil refineries ablaze and retaliatory missile launches already underway, a rushed, panicked succession like this is a massive gamble. It has the potential to either fiercely rally the fractured Iranian establishment or completely shatter it from the inside out. To truly understand the towering stakes of this moment, we need to look back at the history of the Khamenei dynasty and the crisis that has been brewing for years. Ali Khamenei originally rose to absolute power way back in 1989, following the death of the revolution's founder, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. For nearly 40 years, he steered the Iranian state through a minefield of crippling economic sanctions, sprawling proxy wars across the Middle East, and incredibly tense nuclear standoffs with the West. But as he aged, the question of who would succeed him became the most guarded secret in Tehran. For years, quiet whispers echoed through the halls of power that his son Mojtaba was being groomed for the throne. Intelligence reports from as early as 2024 noted that Mojtaba was slowly stepping away from his traditional roles in the religious seminaries of Qom, positioning himself for a higher calling. Geopolitical analysts repeatedly flagged him as the undeniable frontrunner, even as Iranian state media fiercely denied the rumors, calling them Western propaganda designed to divide the nation. Fast forward to late 2025 and the turbulent early months of 2026. The pressure cooker finally exploded. Massive, unprecedented protests rocked the streets of Iran, driven by a population suffocated by economic collapse and political repression. Meanwhile, on the global stage, U.S. President Donald Trump publicly mocked the aging Khamenei, referring to him as a sick man, and openly calling for the total dismantling of the regime. Simultaneously, the long-standing shadow war with Israel violently escalated into open, undeniable, full-scale conflict. And then, on February 28th, the unthinkable happened for the Iranian establishment. Airstrikes took out the supreme leader himself, plunging the entire theocratic regime into an existential crisis. Almost immediately after the confirmation of his death, the rigid mechanisms of Iran's constitution kicked in, specifically Article 111. This constitutional mandate required the immediate formation of an interim leadership council to fill the terrifying void at the top. This emergency group included some of the most powerful men in the country: President Masoud Pezeshkian, Chief Justice Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei, and Guardian Council member Alireza Arafi, alongside parliamentary powerhouses like Mohamed Bagher Ghalibaf. Their primary job was simple, but incredibly dangerous. They had to buy time. They had to project an image of stability to the Iranian people and the watching world. While the Assembly of Experts, an 88-member council of aging Islamic clerics tasked with picking the next supreme leader, scrambled to meet amid a literal war zone. And now, we arrive at the pivotal event. What exactly happened in the dark, frantic hours of that succession process? By March 3rd, with enemy bombs literally falling on military installations, the Assembly held an unprecedented, highly secure online meeting. This was the first time in the history of the Islamic Republic that such a critical decision was negotiated virtually, under the immediate threat of air raids. Behind the digital veil, intense, almost violent lobbying was taking place. Defense and intelligence analysts report that top commanders of the IRGC applied immense psychological and political pressure on the clerics. They made it clear that in a time of war, the country did not need a philosopher or a moderate. It needed a wartime commander. Other prominent contenders, like Hassan Khamenei, the grandson of the revolution's founder, or the seasoned cleric Alireza Arafi, were technically in play. But the military had already made its choice. Mojtaba Khamenei emerged victorious from the digital smoke. Just 5 days later, on March 8th, the Assembly officially announced him to the world as the new, undisputed supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iranian state media immediately went into overdrive, flooding the airwaves with confirmations and framing the rapid appointment as a vital symbol of national continuity in turbulent times. He had beaten the odds. Pre-war speculation had heavily pitted Mojtaba against political heavyweights like the late President Ebrahim Raisi, or even other prominent religious figures. But the wartime dynamic changed everything. So, why does this specific decision matter so much to the strategic balance of the world? First and foremost, it locks in absolute, unyielding, hardline continuity. Mojtaba Khamenei, currently in his early 50s, has long been viewed as his father's shadow operator. He is deeply, inextricably tied to the IRGC, the Basij paramilitary forces, and the darkest corners of the Iranian intelligence networks. Historical analysts frequently point to his pivotal role in brutally suppressing the massive 2009 Green Movement protests. He was the architect of the crackdown, building a fierce loyalty among the regime's most violent enforcers. This history suggests, without a shadow of a doubt, that he will not pivot to reform. Instead, he will double down. He is expected to pour even more resources into Iran's axis of resistance, empowering proxy armies like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and militant groups across Iraq and Syria. Second, this succession is happening against the backdrop of catastrophic U.S. and Israeli strikes that have actively crippled Iran's critical infrastructure. Major oil refineries are offline, a move that Iran's foreign ministry has furiously condemned as the equivalent of chemical warfare on its civilian population. From Washington, the Trump administration has issued chilling warnings. The White House has stated that any new leader in Tehran will not last long without American approval, signaling that the military and economic pressure will only intensify. Domestically, the naming of Mojtaba might temporarily unify the military hardliners who fear for their lives, but it fundamentally alienates the vast majority of the population. Any lingering hopes for moderation that were sparked during Pezeshkian's presidency have now been completely extinguished. From a broad foreign policy lens, the world should expect absolutely no thaw in relations. Pre-succession intelligence reports indicated that the IRGC aggressively pushed Mojtaba to the top, specifically so he would prosecute the ongoing war with maximum brutality. We are likely looking at a scenario where Tehran's alliances with Moscow and Beijing deepen significantly. Iran will desperately need advanced Russian air defense systems and Chinese economic lifelines to survive. In return, the risk of devastating retaliation widens drastically. Military strategists are warning of massive drone and missile swarms targeting U.S. bases across the Middle East, or catastrophic strikes on critical oil facilities in neighboring Saudi Arabia. The response from President Trump has been characteristically swift and blunt. In a series of live updates broadcast globally, he formally declared that major combat operations have begun, directly tying the chaotic succession in Tehran to the ongoing aggressive U.S. military actions. The stakes in Washington were violently raised this week when a U.S. service member tragically died from wounds sustained in a related Iranian proxy attack in the Gulf. This casualty has poured rocket fuel on Washington's narrative of an unrelenting, unacceptable Iranian threat. Trump has long framed the regime in Tehran as the absolute axis of global chaos. Mojtaba's hardline ascension plays perfectly into the hands of those in the U.S. administration actively calling for complete regime decapitation. Internationally, the reactions are pouring in like a tidal wave. In Israel, the government and military officials who have predicted this exact aggressive shift for years likely view Mojtaba's appointment as ultimate validation for their preemptive strikes. To Jerusalem, more Khamenei simply means more enmity, more terrorism, and more justification to keep the fighter jets in the air. Global news broadcasts are framing the succession as a tragic, almost inevitable escalation of the conflict. Despite their refineries burning, Iranian officials are vowing on state television to fight to the last drop of blood. Meanwhile, European leaders, following familiar patterns in Middle Eastern crises, are desperately urging restraint and de-escalation, terrified of a regional war that could send millions of refugees toward their borders. Across the Persian Gulf, Arab states are quietly bracing for the explosive fallout. And in the East, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are likely offering quiet back-channel backing to Tehran, bolstering Mojtaba's defiance in order to keep the United States bogged down in another endless Middle Eastern war. But when you look closer, expert analysis paints a deeply divided, fragile picture inside Iran. Independent geopolitical monitors highlight that the IRGC's raw muscle completely overrode all other religious candidates. This effectively transforms Iran from a traditional Islamic theocracy into a hybrid military dictatorship wearing clerical robes. Before the bombs started falling, many diplomatic circles believed moderates or traditional clerics might actually take the helm. But the brutal dynamics of war heavily favored the son who controls the guns. Diplomats in the region are now whispering about a fortress Iran mindset taking over. There will be absolutely no negotiations, no nuclear talks, and no compromises while the country is under fire. And this leads to the most terrifying wild card of all. Commentators and nuclear watchdogs are sounding the alarm over a potential nuclear acceleration. With suspected nuclear sites possibly compromised or threatened by the recent airstrikes, Mojtaba and his IRGC generals could use the need for rebuilding as the ultimate justification to sprint toward a fully weaponized nuclear bomb. If they believe the regime is truly facing extinction, a nuclear deterrent might be viewed as their only remaining insurance policy. On the flip side, the internal rifts within the regime are showing dangerous cracks. The chairman of the Assembly of Experts, a 92-year-old cleric named Mohammad Ali Movahedi Kermani, technically led the rushed voting process. But the glaring exclusion of figures like Hassan Khomeini signals a total, uncompromising purge of any reformist voices. If massive street protests reignite, fueled by widespread internet blackouts, soaring casualties, and economic starvation, Mojtaba's iron grip could quickly begin to slip. You cannot rule a country entirely by force if the military itself becomes exhausted. The broader geopolitical implications of this moment stretch far, far beyond the borders of Tehran. Think about the ideological shockwave. This decision permanently cements a father-to-son handover of power. This is happening in a revolutionary theocracy that was fundamentally founded on violently overthrowing a hereditary monarchy. The sheer hypocrisy of this dynastic succession is already providing massive amounts of fuel for dissidents, opposition groups, and Western propagandists alike. For the U.S. and Israeli military alliance, Mojtaba's ascension provides the perfect justification for sustained, grinding combat operations. It also has the potential to draw in more regional allies, uniting fearful nations against the sprawling network of Iranian proxies stretching from the mountains of Yemen to the borders of Lebanon. And then, there is the global economy. Oil markets are currently spiking to terrifying levels. The ongoing strikes on Iranian refineries, combined with the looming threat of Iranian retaliation against regional oil hubs, fundamentally threaten the global energy supply. Traders are recalling the 2019 tanker crises in the Gulf, but warning that the current situation is magnified tenfold. In this chaos, Russia gains immense geopolitical leverage by selling essential arms and oil, while China waits in the wings, eagerly eyeing heavily discounted sanctioned crude oil to fuel its own economy. Broader international alliances are beginning to severely fracture. Inside NATO, intense debates are raging over how much military involvement is necessary or justified. And in the Middle East, quiet whispers of a historic fast-track normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel are accelerating, driven purely by the mutual existential fear of a fully militarized, desperate Iranian state. If you're glued to how these monumental power shifts are rippling through the fabric of global security, just like we are here, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more in-depth breakdowns on the 2026 Iran war, the evolving Trump doctrine, and exactly what comes next on the geopolitical chessboard. Turn on your notifications because this story is moving incredibly fast, and the landscape changes by the hour. So, looking ahead, what exactly can we expect in the coming days and weeks? First, keep a close watch for highly publicized vows of absolute loyalty from the top brass of the IRGC. Mojtaba Khamenei's very first public address will be critical. His words could act as an immediate green light for massive regional escalations. We could see direct orders to harass or even attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz, the vital maritime choke point through which a massive percentage of the world's oil flows. We will also likely see upcoming formalized assembly sessions designed to artificially legitimize his newfound powers to the Iranian public. But while the regime focuses on pageantry, the U.S. and Israeli airstrikes show absolutely no signs of slowing down. The biggest wildcard right now lies with the proxy forces. The Houthis in Yemen, or Hezbollah in Lebanon, could decide to strike international shipping lanes or Israeli cities even harder, acting independently to test the resolve of the new supreme leader or acting directly on his fresh orders. On the diplomatic front, there will always be whispers in the dark, back-channel talks, quietly facilitated by neutral mediators in Oman or Qatar, might desperately probe for temporary ceasefires or humanitarian pauses. But President Trump's aggressive, uncompromising warnings suggest that Washington has zero appetite for negotiations, leaving very little room for diplomacy to actually breathe. Domestically, inside Iran, prepare to witness some of the most severe, uncompromising crackdowns in the nation's modern history. The state security apparatus will proactively attempt to crush any hint of unrest before it can snowball, while state media works overtime to project a facade of unbreakable national unity. By mid-March, we could easily see emergency proxy summits in the region, or an unprecedented intensification of U.S. military operations aimed at decapitating the regime's new leadership before they can fully consolidate their power. In the end, the sudden appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei is not just a simple name change on a government letterhead. It is a massive, incredibly dangerous wartime bet. It is a gamble on iron-fisted, militarized continuity in the middle of a perfect storm that threatens to completely engulf the entire Middle East in flames. As American combat operations ramp up, and as Iran loads its missiles for retaliation, this historic succession sets the absolute stage for either a grinding, bloody stalemate or an explosive, catastrophic turning point in modern history. One thing is absolutely clear. Global tensions have just hit a terrifying new high. And the ripple effects of the decisions being made right now in the bunkers of Tehran, the war rooms of Tel Aviv, and the halls of Washington will be felt by every single one of us for generations to come. Stay tuned.